In 1984, The Temptations, one of the most influential American R&B vocal groups, released their biggest single since 1975, titled "Treat Her Like a Lady." It was an upbeat electropop R&B tune that was favored among many, not only because of its infectious dance rhythms, but also because the lyrical content was about treating women with the utmost respect. In his debut as a lead singer, Ollie Woodson claims he's a man who doesn't believe chivalry is dead. He would gladly open doors for you, light your cigarettes, and help you with your coat. But upon closer listen, one lyric seems out of place, even contradictory to the song's theme. In the latter half of the song, Woodson sings, "She's a bad son of a gun, I'm her lovin' Don Juan." What's strange is how a song about respecting women references a figure who does nothing of the sort. Don Juan was a seducer, a trickster, a womanizer, whose only goal in life was to exhaust the number of women he beds. His name symbolizes sex, and out of all the artists who have used his name as a metaphor for their sexual prowess, it is my contention that the Canadian R&B singer Abel Tesfaye, better known as The Weeknd, is the only one who warrants serious consideration. However, before I can make this argument, it's important to get a perspective on what it really means to be Don Juan. Although his exact origin isn't certain, the earliest full dramatization of the Don Juan character was in a play written in the 17th century by Spanish dramatist Tirso de Molina, titled
El Burlador de Sevilla y Convidado de Piedra,
or The Trickster of Sevilla and the Stone Guest. The play tells the story of a young and reckless Spaniard named Don Juan Tenorio, who seduces multiple women, escapes arrest, crashes a wedding, and kills a man, all before his negligible death literally at the hand of a ghost. In his first conquest, he pretends to be the lover of Duchess Isabella, but upon seeing his face in the light, she sounds the alarm and has him arrested. Lucky for him, Don Juan's uncle, Don Pedro Tenorio, arrives on the scene, and instead of arresting his nephew, Uncle Pedro helps him escape to Tarragona, where he is saved by a peasant girl named Tisbea. She too falls for his seduction, and after she is dishonored, he abandons her, and in a fiery rage, she throws herself into the sea. Don Juan continues his conquest in the city of Sevilla by dishonoring yet another woman, Doña Ana. She screams, and her father, Don Gonzalo, rushes to her room. However, this encounter ends with Don Juan slaying the nobleman and making an escape, while another man is arrested in his stead. The next day, Don Juan crashes a wedding and outright claims that he knew and already deflowered the bride, Aminta, and by law she must now marry him. In the end, one night at dinner, he is visited by the ghost of Don Gonzalo, who invites Don Juan to dine with him in the churchyard. Don Juan agrees and bravely eats a meal consisting of scorpions and vipers. Finished, Don Gonzalo grabs his hand and strikes him dead. End of play. If Don Juan lived in our time, he would have been the scandal of the Me Too movement. And although you may want to dismiss him as just another playboy, Don Juan has served as a subject of earnest study by some philosophers, one such being the 20th century French philosopher Albert Camus. In his 1942 essay titled
Le mythe de Sysphus,
Camus cites Don Juan as a prime example of what he calls an absurd man. Camus believed that humans are conditioned to search for inherent value and meaning in the world, only to never find it. He referred to this as absurd, and it was the basis of his philosophy. An absurd man is he who, without negating it, does nothing for the eternal. In other words, it's someone who lives maximally in the moment for the moment. In reading the myth of Sisyphus, I've identified 3 key components that make up the absurd man, and in essence, both Don Juan and The Weeknd. The absurd man is amoral. He accepts that life is meaningless and continues to live willfully in spite of this, and he is devoid of hope for another life. most people would make the claim that Don Juan lacks morals. In the second act alone of Molina's play, he attempts to conquer 2 women, one of which is in the middle of her wedding. But what makes him amoral as opposed to immoral is that immorality violates a higher power's law or code. Don Juan, however, does not acknowledge such a power. He has his own moral code, one of his likes and dislikes. In 2015, The Weeknd released his second commercial album, Beauty Behind the Madness, and has a track titled Losers, where he sings about dropping out of high school at 17 to pursue a career in music. The hook goes, "So what can you show me that my heart don't know already? We make our own sense, and you're qualified to me." And on the somber R&B track Prisoner, he sings, "I'm a prisoner to my addiction. I'm addicted to a life that's so empty and so cold. I'm a prisoner to my decisions." Not only is he making evaluations with his own rubric, he is conscious of the consequences involved. Living by one's own code of conduct can invite trouble when it violates public law or personal honor. In Don Juan's case, he is nearly arrested and later killed by the ghost of a nobleman. Critics of The Weeknd will point to songs like High for this, the intro to his 2011 mixtape House of Balloons, where Abel introduces a girl to his exo party lifestyle with drugs, sex, and alcohol. Although he made it clear in an interview with Rolling Stone that anything and everything done was consensual, some may nonetheless disapprove of his actions. The lucidity of his code of conduct is not permission to be excused, but the absurd man does not seek justification. A mind imbued with the absurd does not legitimize his consequences by being lucid of them. Rather, it considers them calmly. It is ready to pay up. It is not a matter of guilt, but a matter of responsibility. One final point I'd like to make is that the absurd does not authorize everything. Camus tells us that it does not recommend crime. If all experiences are indifferent, that of duty is as legitimate as any other. We are taught at an early age the aphorism quality over quantity. In many respects, such as diet and fashion, this is good advice to follow. On the other hand, Camus suggests that the notion of quantity has not been sufficiently explored. A man's rule of conduct and his scale of values have no meaning except through the quantity and variety of experiences he has been in a position to accumulate. There is truth in this statement. For example, someone who judges their current work situation to be good may do so because they can compare it to past places of employment and second-hand experiences. The more you have, the better you are at making evaluations. However, it's not just important to accumulate many experiences, but to be conscious of them as well. Don Juan realizes in action an ethic of quantity. In Molina's play, he moves from a duchess to a peasant girl to a nobleman's daughter and finally to another man's bride, all with the feeling of nonchalance. His way of life is seduction without pause. In similar spirit, one of my favorite songs by The Weeknd titled The Birds Part 1 from his 2011 mixtape Thursday is a braggadocious precaution in falsetto, warning a woman not to fall in love with him. The first verse goes, "Hope you see, it won't mean a thing to me. I've been doing this too long, baby girl, I felt it all. So watch out if you try to play your luck. Ain't nobody gonna care enough to catch you fall." And again on Beauty Behind the Madness, he reports, "She asked me if I do this every day. I said often. Ask how many times she rode the wave, not so often." Both libertines display an ethic in quantity and coolness to past lovers. They exhaust the number of women they bed and do not put meaning in their encounters. Not to believe in the profound meaning of things belongs to the absurd man. In the first act of Molina's play, Don Juan's father warns his son of God's punishment when death comes, and to this, Don Juan replies with his famous motto,
En la muerte, tan largo me lo fiáis. De aquí a allá hay larga jornada.
roughly translated as, "Death, what a long respite you give me, for today is still long." Don Juan's attitude drips nonchalance to concerns about the end of his sexcapades. But how does he react when the end finally comes? About 150 years after Molina's play, the 18th century classical composer Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart wrote Don Giovanni, an opera based off of Molina's Don Juan. While some of the names and scenes differ, both works are structurally very similar. Towards the end of the second act of Mozart's Don Giovanni, Don Juan is in the middle of dinner when the slain commendatore in the form of a statue suddenly appears in front of him and invites Don Juan to dine with him. His servant Leporello shrieks at the sight and warns Don Juan to refuse his offer lest he dies. Don Juan is unafraid, and when the statue offers his hand, Don Juan takes it and immediately feels a cold death coming over his body. The statue orders him to repent and change his life, but Don Juan refuses. The statue persists, but Don Juan holds firm. Suddenly, flames begin to engulf him and Don Juan dies impenitent. For Don Juan, hell was something to be provoked. "To err is human, to forgive divine," writes Alexander Pope, but the absurd man has no use of forgiveness. He simply must be ready to pay the price. The only life that mattered to Don Juan was the lucid one he was living. He retained his human honor till the end. In his song Real Life, Abel sings, "Heaven only lets a few in. It's too late for me to choose it. So don't waste precious tears on me. I'm not worth the misery. I'm better off when I'm alone. That's real life." On the hills, he says, "I'm just trying to live my life for the moment." And on his third commercial album Starboy, the track Ordinary Life features Abel similarly singing, "Everybody said it would hurt in the end, but I feel nothing." Both men have shooed away the Grim Reaper and have made a commitment to maximal living in their conscious lives. In the terms we've thus laid out, it would seem as if The Weeknd is unquestionably the Don Juan of R&B by way of the absurd man. But if you are a fan of his music, you might have noticed that I've yet to reference two projects that would give us cause to pause: his 2018 EP My Dear Melancholy and his 2020 album After Hours. As much as I'd like to avoid gossiping about who The Weeknd is dating, his love life is a topic we must broach in order to best understand these two projects. In 2015, Abel was introduced to model Bella Hadid, and in April of that same year, the two were spotted together attending the California music festival Coachella. It has since been an on-again, off-again relationship, but the two have shown genuine care and support for each other throughout the years. But after one breakup in 2017, Abel began dating singer and TV actress Selena Gomez. Later that same year, the two split, and Abel once again began to pine for his former girlfriend. Since his relationships with both women, Bella Hadid and Selena Gomez have had a major impact on Abel's lyrical content. On Call Out My Name, the first track of his 2018 EP, Abel sings, "I said I didn't feel nothing, baby, but I lied. I almost cut a piece of myself for your life," a reference to Selena's need for a kidney transplant. The fourth track compares the two women. "Wasted times I spent with someone else. She wasn't even half of you, reminiscing how you felt." Here, Abel is seemingly saying the time he spent with Gomez and not Hadid was wasted. Continuing with similar subject matter, his latest album After Hours is a lamentation of his sinful ways, a poetic apology to Hadid, and a goodbye card to Los Angeles. In Hardest to Love, he acknowledges his faults in his relationship with Hadid, and in Scared to Live, he sings, "I am not the man I used to be. Did some things I couldn't let you see. Refuse to be the one who taints your heart, so don't be scared to live again," thus encouraging her to move on from him. This entire album is filled with feelings of regret, not only for the women he's been involved with, but also with his lifestyle in general, and yes, that includes his Don Juanism. Camus asks, is Don Juan melancholy? To this he answers, no, this is not likely. Melancholy people have two reasons for being so. They don't know or they hope. Don Juan knows and does not hope. Up to the frontiers of physical death, he is ignorant of melancholy. So all things considered, The Weeknd disqualifies himself from being the Don Juan of R&B, right? Short answer, yes. The lamentations on his two latest projects strictly contradict the code of the Don. But herein lies the problem with drawing conclusions about people who are still living. We as humans are all agents of and subject to change, and the person we were before may not be the person we are now, and the person we are now may not be the person we will become. It's like reviewing a book that's still being written. Abel's story is not finished and he may change again. He has already. His first commercial album, Kissland, has songs about always meeting the wrong girl and possibly missing out on the right one. But Abel is just as dead inside as the girls he meets, and in Don Juan's spirit, he can adapt and move on with ease. On the contrary, the first track on After Hours has Abel questioning if he can ever be alone again, to the point where his life may depend on help from his partner. His first album paints a man content with disconnect, while his latest album depicts a man who's trying to cope with his life choices. But the clearest example of his change comes from my favorite project of his, the 2011 mixtape Echoes of Silence. The second track, Montreal, samples the French pop song
Laisse tomber les filles.
Montreal begins with Abel singing
Laisse tomber les filles. Laisse tomber les filles. Un jour c'est toi qu'on laissera.
Which translates to leave the girls alone, leave the girls alone, or one day it'll be you they will leave. True to the spirit of Don Juan, Abel dismisses such a possibility and brags about how a girl could have had him doing anything she pleased, but he is too much of a pro at letting go. 9 years and 2 relationships later, the lyrics of Frances Gall read like a prophecy come true. And while we may be quick to close the book on this inquiry, let us not forget that on that same elegiac album, Abel sings, "'Cause I'm heartless, and I'm back to my ways 'cause I'm heartless. All this money and this pain got me heartless, low life for life 'cause I'm heartless." Has he completely lost his faith, or will he perhaps find it in the love of another woman? Only time will tell. Camus concludes his section on Don Juanism envisioning the seducer locked in a cell of a Spanish monastery. He is looking through a narrow slit in the sun-baked wall and seeing a noble, soulless land in which he recognizes himself. In my surreal adaptation, Abel lays awake in his bed coming down off a high in the penthouse suite of a hotel room. A mysterious light breaks through a narrow slit between the part of the curtains and lands upon his body. The light is so warm that it's palpable and he's immediately drawn to it. He gets out of bed and walks to the windows, where upon sliding the curtains open, he is engulfed in the most radiant of lights and freezes for a moment before letting his arms drop to his side. The source of light is a woman, nude, floating above the ground. She has long brown hair and a pair of antlers growing from her head. She speaks without moving her mouth and says, "I'm here for you." The sound is more beautiful and enchanting than the voices of the Greek sirens. A smile forms on his face and Abel begins to feel weightless, like his body is being absorbed into the woman's. As he is being drawn to her, he spots out of the corner of his eye a single white feather on the carpet floor. He looks around the room and catches sight of a woman's figure with the wings of a dove. The brilliant light from outside is beginning to blind him, and with every passing moment, his vision becomes more and more blurred and unable to make distinctions. He extends an arm to the woman in the room, but she does not move. She remains still. A sense of ambivalence begins to overcome him, and there he remains in mid-air, his face pointing towards the woman with the wings and his body pointing towards the woman with the antlers.